In a town where women were priced like cattle and men forgot to blink, one quiet man made a choice that wasn't loud, but changed everything. The heat sat low and mean over the town of Calico Ridge. Dust hung in the air like an old sin no one spoke of. Horses stood tethered and restless outside the general store, their hides twitching against flies that didn't know shame. In front of the saloon, men leaned on porch rails with spit-stained beards and eyes that didn't blink enough. Women didn't walk alone here, not if they had history. Clara Whitmore stood at the edge of the wooden platform, wrists bound loosely with a length of cotton rope, her chin lifted just enough not to look broken. Her dress was clean, faded at the hem, hands folded like she still believed manners might matter. But her eyes, they held the dull glint of someone who had run out of reasons to run. Beside her, the auctioneer barked names and offers with the charm of a dying rattlesnake. Childbearing age, he called, strong hips, quiet disposition, once married, no children. That last part hung like a curse. No children. She didn't flinch. The crowd shifted. A few men spat. One woman shook her head slow. No one looked too long. And then, from the back of the square, came a sound that didn't belong. The creak of a wagon wheel, heavy boots in rhythm, and then a man. He wasn't handsome, not the way stories lie. But he looked like someone who stayed when others left. Broad shoulders under a patched coat. A red kerchief tied lazy at the neck. And in his eyes, nothing soft, but nothing cruel either. He didn't speak. Just walked to the edge of the platform and held up a worn leather pouch. The auctioneer stopped mid-spit. "Sold," he said. Clara looked at him for the first time, and he didn't look away. The sun beat down like judgment that afternoon in Dry Rock. Not angry, just tired. Like it had seen too much of this before. Clara Whitmore stood with her toes buried in the dust. Her dress, once blue, now dulled to the color of regret. Her father's hand was still on her shoulder, firm, rough, and too familiar. He hadn't touched her in months, not since the day he found out her womb bore no promise. Now here he was, gripping her like a sack of grain. "She's a hard worker," he barked at the crowd. "Quiet, clean, not much trouble unless you're looking for heirs." Laughter snorted from the shade. A boy tossed a stone. A woman crossed herself. Clara stood still. She could feel the hot eyes on her, measuring her worth not by her mind, not by her kindness, but by the silence in her belly. She remembered the tea, the roots, the midwife's shaking head, and the way her husband stopped saying her name. The way he chose a younger bride, who smiled with all her teeth and promised 5 sons like she was ordering them. And the way Clara's wedding dress was torn, not by accident, thrown out like spoiled bread. Now her father was selling her off like leftovers at market. He didn't look ashamed, just desperate. He was behind on his grazing fees and low on cattle. Clara was just the only thing left with value. A silence spread through the crowd, slow and awkward like molasses poured in winter. Then came the sound of boots. Measured. Heavy. One by one heads turned. Elias Boone stepped forward through the crowd, tall as a barn beam, eyes shaded by a dusty brim. Sap stained his sleeves, and a saw blade hung from his saddle belt. He didn't look at Clara right away. He looked at the man beside her, then at the satchel on the ground, then slowly at her eyes. No judgment, no pity, just quiet. Then came the pouch of coins, dropped without a word. No haggle, no spit shake, just choice. "You sure?" her father sneered, too loud. "She don't come with a refund." Elias spoke like a man used to letting silence do most of the work. "She won't be judged no more." Then he turned, boots kicking up dust, and walked away. Didn't wait, didn't beckon. Clara stood in that silence a moment longer, until her father leaned in, breath sour with chew, and grunted, "Well, go on. You're his now." She bent down, picked up her satchel, light as a feather, heavy as shame, and walked. Behind her, the crowd dissolved back into talk and trade. Ahead of her, a mule waited. A man waited. And maybe, just maybe, something else waited too. The cart creaked along the rutted trail like an old hymn sung without joy. Clara sat rigid on the wooden bench, her satchel hugged to her chest, her knuckles white from the grip. The wind smelled of dust and sunburnt grass. Beside her, Elias Boone handled the reins in silence, his eyes trained far ahead, where the horizon met nothing. He didn't speak. And somehow, that silence felt safer than any word she'd been offered in years. Around them, the prairie spread wide, golden, bare, unknowable. Fence posts leaned like tired old men. Hawks traced slow circles in the sky, and somewhere in the distance, the lowing of cattle rose and fell like a forgotten memory. Clara risked a glance at him. His jaw was square, covered in a 2-day stubble. His coat smelled faintly of pine and smoke. A long scar traced the back of his right hand. His shirt was patched at the elbows, not with neat care, but with the kind of haste born of too much to do and no time to do it. She looked down at her own hands, still scratched from her father's shove. Her fingers brushed the silver locket at her throat. Inside was her mother's portrait, sketched in soft charcoal. She remembered when her mother gave it to her, on the last good day. "When the world forgets your worth," her mother had said, "this won't." The thought stung now, because the world had indeed forgotten. "Why?" Clara asked finally, voice no louder than a breath. "Why did you take me?" Elias didn't look over. 4 kids, no wife, no time to court one properly. She swallowed. "So I'm a governess." "No," he said after a pause. "Just someone who ain't cruel. That's enough." The cart bumped across a creek bed. The water was low, barely a trickle. Clara stared ahead, unsure what to make of this man, or this arrangement. Was she safe, or simply somewhere else to be used? She leaned back and let the silence settle between them again. But it was different now, not cold, just uncertain. The shadows grew longer. By dusk, the cabin appeared, half hidden in a grove of pine. The roof sagged slightly. The porch leaned westward. Chickens scattered as the wheels creaked to a halt. A dog barked once, then retreated. And then, faces. 4 of them. Children pressed to the window, eyes wide and still. 1 girl, 3 boys. All with Boone's red-brown hair, all with that same guarded expression. Elias stepped down first. "This is Miss Clara," he said, not quite to the children, not quite to her. "She'll be staying." The youngest, barely more than a toddler, waddled out and latched onto Elias's boot. Elias scooped him up one-armed and opened the cabin door with the other. He didn't help her down. He didn't have to. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine resin, ash and bread gone slightly stale. It wasn't dirty, but it wasn't tidy either. Lived in, honest. "Room's upstairs," Elias said. "Warm water's in the bucket." Clara climbed the stairs, each step groaning underfoot. Her room was small, bed, stool, a sliver of mirror. The window overlooked the garden plot and the broken fence near the barn. She sat down slowly. Her knees shook. Her satchel fell beside her boots with a soft thud. Then, finally, her breath broke. She wept. Quiet, open tears that carried no shame. No theatrics. Just truth. In that moment, she wasn't trying to earn a place or prove she was worth keeping. She was simply breathing. Later, she sat by the window, the locket in her hand, tracing her mother's lines with her thumb. "I don't know if you'd be proud," she whispered, "but I made it here, still standing." Somewhere in the dark below, Elias leaned his axe against the porch post and stared at the sky. He remembered the day his wife died, how the house fell quiet in a way it had never been before. She'd been sick long before the fever took her. But the silence after, that was what cracked him. Now the house was not silent. There were voices, tiny footsteps, and now Clara's tears. Elias exhaled, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like a beginning. The morning sun filtered through the pine trees in quiet streaks, lighting dust in the air like little ghosts dancing. Clara woke early, her back stiff from a bed that creaked like it had stories of its own. Her feet touched the cold floor. No slippers, just wood and silence. Downstairs, the cabin was already alive, not with noise, but with motion. Elias was outside chopping wood, shirt sleeves rolled, sweat on his brow before the day had even begun. The children moved like shadows, half wary, half curious. The oldest boy, Thatcher, watched her from behind the staircase post. Not hiding, just cautious. Ellie Boone, the girl, had her hair in tangles and her arms crossed like she'd already judged Clara unworthy. The middle child, Emmett, banged a wooden spoon against a tin plate. The youngest, Jonah, clung to the leg of the dining bench, thumb in mouth, eyes wide. Clara cleared her throat. No one moved. She found the pot on the stove, filled it with water from the bucket, and began boiling oats. No one asked, no one helped, but no one stopped her either. Breakfast was awkward. The children ate in silence, eyes shifting between her and their bowls. Elias didn't come in. Clara suspected he did that on purpose, to give them room, or to test her. When the dishes were done, she began gathering laundry. Socks left balled under beds. A shirt stuck behind a cupboard. One of the boys had wet the sheets. She didn't say a word, just cleaned. Later outside, she scrubbed clothes on a washboard until her knuckles turned raw. Chickens darted around her feet. A goat bleated from beyond the barn. Elias passed her once, carrying a load of split logs. He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. She couldn't tell if that was a kind of praise or a kind of warning. By midday, the children began to circle closer. Not talk, not touch, just nearer. Thatcher lingered long enough to ask, "Why'd you come here?" Clara considered lying, but something in his tone, too serious for his years, made her answer plain. "Nowhere else to go," she said. He nodded once, as if that made perfect sense. That afternoon, the wind picked up. Clara hung sheets on the line, but they whipped like sails and tangled. Ellie Boone stood nearby, arms crossed, judging silently. Clara climbed onto a stool, trying to reach the far pin. The wind caught the sheet. She slipped. Her knee struck the ground hard. The sheet flew, and Ellie laughed. It was the first sound from her all day. Not cruel, not mocking, just surprised, like she hadn't expected the stranger to fall. Clara sat on the ground, rubbing her knee, and chuckled. "Well," she said, "that's one way to fly laundry." Ellie stared. Then, just once, she smiled. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. That night, Clara cooked beans and cornbread. The beans burned. The cornbread fell flat. But they ate it, and no one said a word. Before bed, Elias returned with dirt on his sleeves. He nodded at the stove. "They eat?" "They did," she replied. "Good." Then he said nothing more and went to his room. Clara stood in the doorway a while, the firelight warming one side of her face. Behind her, the children slept in a heap, breath soft. She wasn't their mother. But somehow, the house had started to breathe differently. Not because she came to change it, but because she stayed. Spring returned to Lost Elk without apology. The dirt roads dried, the creek thinned, and the town woke slowly like a man recovering from an old wound. Clara hadn't asked to go. But Elias needed salt and roofing nails, and she knew the general store better than he did. So she climbed into the cart, skirt brushed free of dust, jaw set. She didn't speak much on the ride in, neither did he. The town hadn't changed. Crooked signs still swung in the breeze, The church bell still cracked halfway through its ring. But something inside her had shifted. Her steps were firmer now, eyes not so quick to lower. Inside the store, the air was thick with flour and gossip. Clara kept to the dry goods aisle. She was reaching for a sack of rice when a voice slithered across her spine. "Well, if it ain't the Barren ghost herself." She turned. Her ex-mother-in-law stood by the pickle barrels, fanning herself with a folded newspaper, chin high and heart low. Next to her, draped in lace gloves and smugness, the new wife. "Pretty thing, but cursed," the old woman hissed. "I'll give him a real heir," the girl added, palm brushing a stomach that showed nothing but arrogance. Clara didn't speak, but inside something trembled. And then she remembered. Rain. A doorstep. A bundle of herbs in her hand. No one opened. She waited until her dress stuck to her knees, until her breath caught with cold. Then the new wife cracked the door, smirked, and shut it again. Clara blinked. The memory faded, but the weight stayed. She turned to leave. But then Elias stepped forward. No fanfare. No raised voice. He stood between them like a wall built from pine and silence, looked at the two women as if they weren't worth the words, then turned to Clara and said, not loud, not soft, just steady, "She's the only one who makes our house feel like it has a roof." Silence spread through the store like a spilled jar of molasses, slow, sticky, undeniable. He didn't take her hand. He didn't have to. Clara walked out beside him, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like someone bought. She felt like someone chosen. The evening settled heavy over Lost Elk, warm and slow like a blanket you didn't ask for. The children were asleep. The fire had burned down to quiet embers. Clara stepped outside to fetch water, her footsteps soft on the packed dirt, her breath barely stirring the summer air. She didn't hear him at first, just a shift in the wind, the scrape of boot leather. Then came the voice. "Well, well, the quiet little mule does come out at night." Bo Carver. He leaned on the fence post like rot leaning into wood. His shirt was half buttoned, breath sour with whiskey, eyes slick with something darker. He stepped closer. Too close. "Been hearing stories," he slurred, "about how a barren woman can raise 4 kids like they're her own. What a trick, huh?" Clara turned to walk away, but his hand caught her wrist. Hard. "You owe us a smile," he breathed, "after all the rumors you've stirred." For a second, the world shrank to that hand. The grip, the dirt, her bare feet, the ache of being touched without consent again. And then, Elias. He didn't speak, didn't shout. He came from the barn like a shadow that had weight. One step, one swing, one fist. Bo crumpled. His body hit the earth like wet grain. Elias stood over him, chest rising, eyes not on the man, only on Clara. "You all right?" he asked, voice like gravel wrapped in cloth. She nodded, but her hands were trembling. Without a word, Elias pulled the red kerchief from his neck, the same one he wore the day he bought her. He stepped closer, gently wrapped it around her wrist where Bo's hand had been. "No one touches you," he said steady. "Unless you say so." That was it. No speech, no apology, just a line in the sand, drawn with silence, sealed in cloth, remembered in breath. If you were Clara, 1, would you walk away in silence? 2, or would you stay with the man who defended you without a single word? Type 1 or 2 in the comments. We'd love to know what your heart says. The drought arrived without thunder, just stopped rain, then stopped green, then stopped breath. First went the corn, then the beans. The chickens grew quiet, even the weeds gave up. Dust settled on windows like it meant to stay. Inside the cabin, the air felt thinner each day. The children whispered less. Their hunger became a quiet creature, sitting beside them at dinner, taking more than its share. Elias worked from dawn to dusk, silent, slower. Then one evening, he didn't come in. Clara found him half collapsed in the barn, hands shaking, skin hot. She dragged him inside herself. Boiled bark, rubbed his back with cool cloths. Stayed beside him, her hand never leaving his chest. In the middle of the night, he muttered her name and pleaded, "Don't go." "Not you." She didn't answer. She only tightened her grip. When the fever broke, he slept for a day and a half. And Clara walked outside. She looked over the patch of land behind the barn. It was cracked open, gray and bitter, like old hurt. The wind blew dust into her eyes, but she didn't flinch. She picked up a rusted hoe, brought buckets of water from the deeper well, tied the red kerchief around her wrist, Elias's, now hers, and knelt. She dug. The earth bit back. Dry clumps refused her. The blade slid sideways. Her palms split. Blood dotted the soil like second chances. The children watched from the porch, silent, confused. "She's planting?" one whispered. "Nothing grows now," said another. But Clara didn't look up. Each hole was a prayer, each seed a defiance, not to prove anything, just to say, "I stayed." Day after day she watered. She sang, not for the plants, but for herself. Old lullabies, bits of hymn. Humming not to be heard, but to remember she still had a voice. Her fingers blistered, her back ached. One night she woke from sleep with dirt still under her nails. And still, she went out at dawn. Elias stood at the porch some mornings, never said a word, just watched her kneel, watch her bleed, watch her stay, and then, green. It didn't scream, didn't explode, it just appeared. A single shoot, so thin it bent at the breeze, but alive. She crouched near it, touched it like it might vanish. She didn't smile, just whispered, "You're late." That afternoon, the children followed her out. Caleb brought her a bucket. Ellie picked wildflowers nearby and laid them beside the growing patch. They didn't say, "Thank you," but they stayed. And that, Clara knew, was enough. And another. It happened fast. The scream, the blood, the silence. Caleb had wandered too close to the woodpile. The axe slipped. A red line opened across his thigh. Clara ran before anyone else moved. The world narrowed to a child's cry and the color spilling onto dirt. She tore her apron, pressed hard. "You're all right. You're all right." Over and over, like a spell she wished could stitch skin. Elias lifted the boy, face stone pale. Clara wrapped the wound. Bandages, boiled water, steady hands, though her heart was running wild. That night, Caleb slept on a pillow in the kitchen, leg propped, Clara beside him, one hand on his chest, listening. Just before dawn, a voice cracked through the quiet. "Mama?" Her breath caught. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a slip. It was a declaration. "Mama," he repeated, eyes barely open. "You make the best bread, like my first mama used to." She didn't answer. Couldn't. Just brushed his hair back with a trembling hand. The other children gathered later, quiet but close. Ellie sat beside Clara without a word. Thatcher, the oldest, brought her a small wooden bird he'd carved. Elias stood nearby, watching, always watching. After breakfast, Clara stepped outside. The world looked the same, but she wasn't. Then he came, her ex-husband. He looked thinner, older, a man who'd chased a promise and caught regret instead. "I was wrong," he said. Clara didn't reply. Her silence was sharper now. He stepped forward, voice cracking. "You were always kind, always trying. I didn't see it." She looked him in the eye. "I remember," she said, "standing outside your house, holding herbs, soaking wet. You never opened the door." His shoulders collapsed. "I was a fool." She nodded. "I have 4 children now," she said quietly. "They call me Mama. not because they have to, but because they chose to. And with that, she turned and walked away. Elias stood at the edge of the barn, sack of grain in hand. He'd seen everything. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just looked at her like a man who finally understood what grace looked like in human form. The porch creaked under her steps. It always did, especially when the wind came low and slow through the cottonwoods. Clara sat down with a basket of mending. Thatcher's shirt had a tear at the shoulder. Again. The thread caught sunlight as she worked, fingers no longer clumsy, no longer doubting their place in the world. Inside the house, the children laughed. Someone dropped a spoon. Elias was reading by the hearth, lips moving just slightly. No noise, no drama, just life, unfolding like a worn map, slow and soft and real. Elias stepped outside not long after, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I thought," he said, voice steady, "when I brought you here, it was just to give you shelter." She didn't look up. "I thought you'd leave. Someday." She tied off a thread. "I used to think love was being chosen once," she said. "But it's not. It's being chosen again. After someone's seen all of you. Even the bruises." He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. She stood up and walked toward him, not out of obligation, not out of fear, just because she wanted to. That night, when the house quieted, Clara sat by the window with the small leather notebook Elias had carved for her. The one he left beside her plate the day Caleb called her mama. She opened to a blank page and wrote, "Today is the first day I was loved without having to earn it." Outside, the wind moved gently through the garden. The shoots were taller now. Some even bore blossoms. Ellie had tied a ribbon to one stalk. Caleb had named the tomatoes. They didn't know if they'd last through summer, but they grew anyway. Clara stepped out and looked toward the gate. The carved sign still stood. Not for sale. Not the house. Not the land. Not her. Elias joined her, mug of coffee in hand. They stood in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said, and more importantly, lived. From the other side of the fire, Amos Granger's voice carries through. Some folks get remembered for the things they built. Others, for the people they refuse to abandon. And sometimes, the greatest thing a person ever does ain't dramatic, ain't loud. It's staying, just staying, when they could have walked. Life lessons, told like Amos might say. 1. Love isn't something you earn. It's something someone gives when they know the truth and stay anyway. 2. Family don't always come by blood. Sometimes it's a little boy whisperin' mama when no one told him to. 3. You don't need to grow where you're planted. You just need soil that doesn't push you back out. Now tell us, partner, what story from the old frontier do you want to hear next? A Lone Ranger's last ride? A sheriff's buried regret? Or maybe a love that bloomed where bullets once flew? Drop it in the comments. We're listening. At Cowboy Trail Stories, we'll keep writing, and keep sharing the West that never quits. Thank you all for riding with us. May your trails be smooth, your heart strong, and your coffee hot. Stay wild, stay kind, stay true. Cowboy hat.